at the very heart of the myth, the so-called surgeon's photo.
All of the ones that I've looked at were carved with modern tools.
Chatter, a fair amount of fear generated by that doomsday prediction based on the Mayan calendar.
It's a mystery as old as the hill.
This is as real as you're standing right where you are, sir.
And my mom.
Tell me where you are, John!
If I were you, I'd run the rest of
Emily's video on hoaxes.
right now! Sorry, folks. It won't happen again.
Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies.
Today we're going to be talking about hoaxes, specifically the first layer of the hoax iceberg that was recently posted on Reddit by a user named silentchatter. There are 7 layers to this iceberg, and if you've never heard of one of these icebergs before and you're like, what the hell are you talking about? Then let me explain. People basically make these iceberg charts about absolutely anything, and sometimes they're super weird, sometimes they're very disturbing, sometimes they're just mildly entertaining. At the top of the iceberg is the more mainstream stuff, the things that we've probably all heard about, and the further you go down, the stranger it gets. So we're going to go through each layer on the hoax iceberg in detail and discover some of the most infamous, hilarious and disturbing hoaxes of all time. Let's get into it. First up on the hoax iceberg is fake news, which is not only hella broad, but it's also kind of self-explanatory. I think we all know what fake news is. It's the kind of stuff that your family will share on Facebook and they will insist it's real, and then they'll yell at you about it over your family Christmas. So look forward to that this year. Some good examples of this are the viral stories that Obama signed an executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance in schools, or things like X group is trying to cancel Christmas.
Christmas is cancelled.
It's all this stuff that just gets spread around by bored people with a political agenda, usually on social media. And there's plenty of examples of fake news on all sides of the political persuasion. I don't think I need to tell you more about it. I think we're good. Let's move on. I've just noticed my coffee's in shot. I'm just sipping today. It's a coffee day.
You're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead and out of this.
Every so often you'll jump onto Twitter and you'll see a celebrity name trending and you'll think maybe they've died, but they haven't. It's just somebody making stuff up. And I think my favourite example of this is back in 2009 when a website called fakeawish.com created a hoax story claiming that Jeff Goldblum had fallen off a cliff in New Zealand and died. At the bottom of the original website that it was posted on, it said any reference to specific individuals has been 100% fabricated by website visitors who have created fake stories by entering a name into a blank, non-specific template for the purpose of entertainment. But obviously that didn't stop the mainstream media from actually reporting that Jeff Goldblum had fallen to his death.
He is a bona fide Hollywood superstar who I may have accidentally kind of pronounced dead a few years back. I know.
Even his own mother ended up believing it, and he had to get his publicist to step in and confirm that he was actually alive and well in Los Angeles. I don't really know why people make this kind of stuff up, but I guess it gives you a glimpse into like how the public are going to react at your death if you're a celebrity, even if it does absolutely terrify everybody that loves and cares about you that ends up reading the story. You see it a lot in YouTube chat sections if you're watching a live stream, and there's always about a handful of idiots in there going, R.I.P. Joe Rogan, I can't believe he's gone.
I'm alive, and I see things mighty clear today. I'm alive.
Sticking with the death theme, I would say this next one verges more into conspiracy than hoax. Many people don't want to believe that their favourite celebrities have passed this mortal coil, so a lot of people make up stories about how they're still alive. Two of the most well-known examples have to be Elvis Presley and Tupac, but I think the one that sticks out to me the most is Michael Jackson. Now, obviously all of these celebrities are dead, right? I do hope that everyone watching this believes that, because there is literally no evidence to prove that any of these celebrities are still alive. But obviously common sense doesn't prevail with magical conspiratorial thinking, like thinking your favourite celebrity has actually faked their own death and is alive somewhere. And many people have set up entire YouTube channels to prove that people like Michael Jackson are still alive. Take this YouTube channel, for example, Believe, with the all caps lie in the middle. This channel has amassed millions of views with videos propagating all manner of conspiracy theories about Michael Jackson. He's been in Squid Game, he's a man called Teddy Perkins. They were also spreading the conspiracy that he had assumed the identity of a man named Dave, which is, I can't, but I saw it going around a lot on TikTok. And for the first like 20 seconds of it, or not even 20 seconds, it's like the first 5 seconds, you go, oh my God, and it kind of gets you. Right? It gets you immediately because you think, oh my God, maybe. But then when you actually like your rational brain kicks in, you soon realise that it's absolute bollocks. But, and this is the big but, that video claiming that Michael Jackson is a man named Dave, who is now dead himself, has the best part of 1 million views. I don't know what that tells you about society, but it can't be good. A more recent example of this will probably be the people that believe in the 17th letter of the alphabet cult congregating at Dealey Plaza in Dallas on the 2nd of November this month, believing that JFK Jr. was going to reappear because he had faked his own death in 1999.
It is almost 12:29. Any minute now, the big reveal.
But not only that, no, he's going to be the vice president with Donald Trump, and he's going to assist in, you know, doing all of the arrests, like arresting everybody.
The guy who died in the plane crash in the late 90s? I think he's still alive.
I do.
And he's going to come back and be president with Trump this year?
I hope so.
And what a surprise, he didn't show up. Now from the outside it might look totally unbelievable and shocking, but if you've been following any of this stuff, and if you have any friends or family that have fallen victim to it, then you're not going to be at all surprised. It's super dangerous, it's super depressing. Let's move on.
Everybody plays the fool sometimes.
We all know what April Fool's Day is, right? In the simplest of terms, it's a day where you try and get people to believe bullshit. You make up an almost believable story, tell it to someone else, and then when they believe you, you go, April Fool's Day, you bloody idiot. I mean, in today's world, most days feel like April Fool's. I think I'm still on the JFK thing. I think I'm still there mentally. Let's go on to the next one. Not to be confused with fake news masquerading as fact, hoax news websites are designed for the banter. The Onion is obviously one of the most well-known examples of this. For the discerning among us, we can usually tell when something is from a hoax news website versus like a fake news website versus like actual news. But sometimes people don't. And in one case, a bunch of religious fundamentalists, it's always them, isn't it? Always religious fundamentalists. They actually believed an Onion article claiming that Harry Potter books had sparked a rise in Satanism among children.
Warlocks are enemies of God. And I don't care what kind of hero they are. They're an enemy of God. And had it been in the Old Testament, Harry Potter would have been put to death.
It's also kind of like that vampire hunter that I talked about in my last video, quoting a Weekly World News article about a vampire census in his legitimately published book. You'd think that people would actually be able to do their own research and figure out that the article they're reading is a joke, but not in this hell world, apparently. The Museum of Hoaxes is a website that was created in 1997 by a man named Alex Bose, who is properly into hoaxes. It essentially lists all manner of famous and not so famous hoaxes from over the years, but it hasn't been updated for a while. I think the last update was like 2019. Alex has also written a couple of books on hoaxes, and he also runs the website Weird Universe, which anybody that likes this channel will definitely enjoy. Okay, now we're getting on to the good and controversial stuff, and we're kicking it off with crop circles. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to believe in aliens. I class myself as a kind of skeptical believer. Like, in my head, I know that crop circles are most likely all a hoax, but in my heart, I am desperate to believe that they're the work of little green men from another planet. It just makes life more interesting. These strange patterns have been spotted all over the world, and many researchers point to a pamphlet from 1678 as being the first ever reported crop circle. It was called the Mowing Devil, and the story goes that a farmer wouldn't pay a labourer to mow his crops because he was charging too much. The farmer was a tight capitalist bastard, and he said, "I'd rather have the bloody devil mow it." Well, lo and behold, because that night his crops were aflame, and in the morning they had been cut with a precision that no mere mortal could achieve. The history of the crop circle is decidedly more modern though, and it's also very British. A huge amount of crop circles have popped up in Wiltshire, which isn't incredibly surprising because Wiltshire is the home to numerous Neolithic monuments, including Stonehenge and Avebury. It's also like ley lines, all of that kind of thing. There's a lot of mythology in that area, and Avebury was the setting for the absolutely terrifying 1970s TV show Children of the Stones, which is on YouTube. I'd recommend, if you want to be creeped out in like a really kind of like unassuming way, go and watch that TV show. And it was in Wiltshire that two infamous pranksters got to work.
Today, the world's press gathered in anticipation to hear the answer. Their interest had been aroused by an article in this morning's Today newspaper. At long last, there would be proof of earthly involvement. Two men in their 60s from Southampton had been making circles for years, and they would show how it was done.
Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley came forward and claimed that they were the pair behind numerous crop circles throughout both Wiltshire and Hampshire. They would meet up every Friday at the Percy Hobbs pub in Winchester and have a few pints, as you do, and then they decided to go into the nearby wheat fields and create circles, as you do. It's a standard British Friday night. It's what we all do. They ended up creating over 200 crop circles, which is pretty amazing to think about. And it's almost sad that many of us don't want to believe that it's people like Doug and Dave making these circles, that we'd rather believe it's aliens. Like, the skill and intricacy involved in making these circles is pretty staggering.
I've always been a bit interested in UFOs and sightings and that sort of thing. But when I came home in '66, I met Dave, who was a fellow artist. And we used to go venture out on Friday evenings and have a chat about watercolours and things and have a pint of beer. And one evening, summer evening, we saw a cornfield, and I remarked to him about this. And I said, why don't we put a circular depression in this cornfield, the same as they had out in Australia? I said, the UFO Society here, which was at its height at the time, Warminster especially, I said they will probably think that it is a UFO that had landed.
And there are still many that believe that they're the work of extraterrestrials. And I get it, aliens are definitely more appealing than two blokes who've had a couple of pints and decided to make some circles in a field.
I think it's impossible with the piece of equipment. They had a board and a rope, and like it was a horse they were riding. And I think the giveaway really is that when they put their foot on the board, the other leg, with all their weight on it and the weight of the board, is obviously on the crop that they've just pressed down. So it would be quite easy to trace their footsteps, because he couldn't hop along on one leg. It would have to, unless he can hop along on one leg.
But sometimes the simplest explanation is the one that turns out to be true. And in this instance, it was two lads hyped up on the bitters going around a wheat field with a bit of wood. Brilliant. I love it. Let's move on. The alien autopsy video is one of my favourite hoaxes ever, and it is another one that we want to believe, even though it is so obviously fake. It was released in 1995 by a British man called Ray Santilli, and I don't know what it is about us British people and alien hoaxes. There's a lot of them. Maybe because it's genuinely so boring on this island that we're just reduced to making shit up. The alien autopsy film is black and white and is 17 minutes long. It's also totally silent, so when Fox aired it, that's right, Fox put it on the air, it was hosted by Jonathan Frakes, best known for being in Star Trek. But I know him from that TV show he did called Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction.
Does this story seem to contain the recipe for truth? Or is it simply another half-baked lie?
Most of the time it was fiction, to be fair. I'd say a good 95% of the time that show was totally fiction. Anyway, they aired it on Fox 3 times in the early 90s, which actually, when you think about it, it makes sense for Fox because the X-Files was on during that time and the 90s were mad for conspiracy theories. It was also the era of the internet becoming widely available and information also becoming more widespread. And what's more exciting than an alleged alien autopsy?
If what you are about to see is real, it's the most startling film footage in history. Although we remain skeptical, some experts believe this is authentic footage of an alien life form. Alien autopsy. Fact or fiction?
The video is supposed to be from the Roswell crash in 1947, but it's actually filmed in Camden in London, which is a far cry from the dusty desert world of New Mexico. Ray Santilli and his mate Gary Sheffield finally decided to tell the world that the footage was a reconstruction of the actual alien autopsy, which they had apparently gained access to in the early 90s.
If the footage is authentic, that pretty well proves it. We've learned that aliens are visiting the Earth.
Daddy said they looked like a small 10-year-old child.
You could have the proof that this actually was an extraterrestrial craft.
The footage that was circulated was of an alien dummy that was filled with sheep's brains, chicken entrails, and a bunch of other offcuts of meat. Interestingly, there was a film that came out in 2006 called Alien Autopsy, which starred none other than Anton Deck in the roles of Ray and Gary, and it also starred Bill Pullman and Harry Dean Stanton.
My name's Ray Santilli. This is my friend, Gary Sheffield.
All right.
Absolute mad film. Go watch it. 10 out of 10. This one's a bit of a controversial one, the Loch Ness Monster. Now, people get incredibly heated over cryptid sightings, and they will swear on anything that their favourite cryptid exists with zero verifiable proof. Over the years, there have been so many supposed sightings of Nessie, the monster that allegedly lives in Loch Ness in Scotland. The folklore of Nessie goes way, way back to the 6th century AD, but two notable modern hoaxes stand out. The most famous photograph of Nessie is the 1934 snap by Robert Wilson, a surgeon who had been on a fishing trip with his friend Maurice.
The surgeon's photo was a sensation. Not only did it seem to prove that Nessie existed, it came from an impeccable source.
He took a series of photographs, and when he developed them, two of them revealed the elusive Nessie. So naturally, he sells them to the Daily Mail because they love printing any old shit without fact-checking a damn thing, and he makes a quick £100, which would have been a lot back in 1934. It was only in 1994, when his friend Maurice died, that the hoax was revealed. See, Maurice had actually written down the true story of what happened. Robert didn't actually take the photograph at all. A man named Marmaduke Wetherell did, and Nessie was actually a head and neck made of plastic put on a toy submarine.
Made from a toy submarine with a plastic dinosaur's head and neck. It was the handiwork of his stepson, Christian Sperling.
They chose Robert to be the face of the hoax because him being a surgeon meant that he was less likely to be doubted in his story. He lended a bit of credibility to it.
Wilson, who loved practical jokes, agreed to pretend to the press that he had taken the picture. The hoax was a runaway success, and the surgeon's photo was accepted as proof that Nessie existed.
So that infamous picture of Nessie isn't real. Then there was George Edwards. He was a cruise boat operator on Loch Ness, and he had a boat called the Nessie Hunter. He released this photograph of Nessie, claiming that it was real, but sadly, he had actually used a fiberglass hump to create it. He eventually ended up admitting that the photograph wasn't real, and the Nessie community were pissed at him, with one allegedly saying that, "This has really angered me, and I am uttering a witch's curse at him. I will be sending a psychic torpedo to his boat that will come into effect at Halloween." Don't mess with the Loch Ness community. They are serious about this stuff.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Now, sticking with cryptids, there isn't one that I love more than Bigfoot, even though, again, I don't really believe in it. Now, in 2008, Rick Dyer, who was a car salesman, and Matt Witten, who was a police officer, claimed to have found the infamous Bigfoot. They said that they were hiking in Georgia when they came across the body, almost 8 foot tall and weighing a whopping 500 pounds. They'd actually been looking for a while, setting up their own website called BigFootTracker.com and filming themselves looking for the infamous creature.
BigFootTracker.com. We're the best Bigfoot trackers in the world. You know why we're the best Bigfoot trackers? Because we're the only one with the body. We tracked them, we got them.
Hello everyone, and welcome to BigFootTracker.com. I'd like to thank everyone who in the recent weeks has called and gave gave us some good tips on Bigfoot in the area and also called with good questions. I'd also like to address some of the hecklers who have called from so-called competing websites. I'd like to say that we are the best. We stand behind our promise that we're the best. And I would also like to ask that you please don't call and waste our time because we are busy tracking Bigfoot.
Book your expedition today to hunt for Bigfoot. We got some compelling evidence that we're going to release to the world that's going to change everything you knew about Bigfoot.
They ended up interviewing a man on their YouTube channel who claimed to have shot Bigfoot, which is what got them to search that area in the first place.
Okay, sir, could you explain to me what you saw, buddy?
I was in my deer stand, and I seen the creature about 50 yards away. He had to be over 7 feet tall. You know, I didn't see him for that long, and I shot at him. Thought it was a good shot. It must not hit him. He ran across the little path back down in the ditch into the woods. Seemed like an eternity, but it was only 10-15 seconds.
I'm fixing to show you something, and you're going to tell me if this is what you saw.
All right. That's it. No doubt in my mind.
And lo and behold, when they went searching, they found the dead body of Bigfoot. They ended up selling the body to a man named Tom Biscardi, who had a history of making up his own hoaxes when it comes to Bigfoot. And he ran a group called Searching for Bigfoot Incorporated, and he bought this body for $50,000. They even did a press conference together, so damn sure that this was the body of Bigfoot.
This is as real as you're standing right where you are, sir.
When we discovered it, I waited with it. Rick went back and got some help and got a truck, and we moved it out of there.
What I felt, what I prodded, was not a mask that was sewn on a bear hide.
The body ended up getting shipped on ice, but when it started to thaw out, it was obvious that it was actually a costume, a rubber Bigfoot. Steve Coles, who was the host of Squatch Radio, said that on August 16th, the freezer containing the alleged corpse arrived with the Searching for Bigfoot team. The ice was being thawed slowly, and the following day, we were up early to discover that some hair was now exposed. I extracted some from the alleged corpse, examined it, and had some concerns. Basically, they took some of Bigfoot's hair and burned it to see what would happen, and instead of singeing like regular hair would, it melted. It was a great big bloody fake. And what's mad to me is that they didn't notice that to begin with. They literally thought that they had a Bigfoot corpse on ice until the hair thing, and then they noticed that it was a rubber foot in there as well. It's so bloody obvious. It's so obvious from the photograph. That's not Bigfoot, and yet everybody wants to believe, and that clouds any sort of rational thought whatsoever. Matt Whitten ended up losing his job as a police officer, and I'm not 100% sure if it ever ended up in court, but these two guys defrauded that Searching for Bigfoot crew of $50,000, so I do wonder whether they actually ended up paying it back. I don't really get Shark Week. I think it's an American thing and not really something that happens over here. But from what I understand, it's basically a week of shark-related TV programming on the Discovery Channel. And it's really quite popular. People look forward to it every year. Now, back in 2013, there was a documentary that aired during Shark Week called Megalodon, The Monster Shark Lives.
We came across some footage that was shot in Hawaii. Now, it wasn't recently, it was about 4 years ago, but it definitely caught our attention. The video was shot by a father and a son who had come across a whale that had suffered a brutal attack.
What is that? Look over there. What is that?
For those of you not hot on sharks or the different species of shark, the Megalodon is believed to have existed 23 to 3.6 million years ago. Its name means big tooth, and it's pretty dang big, with estimates suggesting a length between 14 and 18 meters in length, but that's based on the size of its teeth and not any actual complete skeleton that's ever been found. There's a Jason Statham film called The Meg, which is all about the Megalodon, but I've never seen it. I couldn't tell you if it's good or not, but it is a Jason Statham film, so that already says a lot about its quality. So what's the controversy? It's just a bloody shark. The documentary was totally fictional, but the Discovery Channel masqueraded it as an actual documentary, which kind of plays into my earlier point that fake news can also be spread by mainstream establishments because embellished and often totally fictional stories are sadly more interesting and entertaining than the truth. It was a super popular documentary, but they got into a lot of hot water about it because they essentially were just saying like, yeah, it's a documentary, instead of saying, no, it's a mockumentary, it's a film masquerading as a documentary.
Mother, tell your children not to walk my way.
I have to speak in a bit of code for this one because of YouTube demonetisation stuff. Thanks, Susan. We love you. We stan. We're going to call it Mother Bird because that's what the art piece is actually called. But the challenge is actually called something else, and I'm sure you've all probably heard of it. Mother Bird was made by a Japanese artist, and the image was spread across social media, and it turned into a massive hoax, hysteria, whatever you want to call it. The story goes that children would be contacted on WhatsApp by Mother Bird, and they'd be told to carry out different challenges, and they would escalate to some pretty wild stuff apparently.
Users start communicating with on Facebook or WhatsApp, a free messaging service. They're given a series of tasks to finally meet them. And those tasks start off small, but then escalate quickly to violent acts with photos for proof. The intimidates and threatens those who don't follow its instructions. And the final challenge can be anywhere from harming to killing yourself.
There were also clips uploaded onto YouTube of Mother Bird spliced in with images of child cartoons. So you'd be a little kid casually watching Peppa Pig and then BAM! Mother Bird shows up. So obviously hysteria began to grow, as it usually does, and the media began reporting that Mother Bird was connected to a number of unalivings. I'm sorry, I hate having to talk in this stupid code, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Even Kim Kardashian posted about it, urging her followers to get YouTube to take down any Mother Bird video. She was basically going full on Helen Lovejoy.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
But it wasn't just concerned parents though. There were a bunch of YouTubers that added to the noise because it was going viral, and viral means views, and views mean money. There was zero evidence that there was anything actually threatening or any threatening messages or nefarious intent going on besides just kids sending each other creepy images or coming across them on YouTube. In the Vox article I read while researching this, Amanda Sakuma points to the case of the two 12-year-old girls who stabbed their friend to summon Slenderman, and how this case definitely exacerbated the hysteria over Mother Bird. Parents are always going to be concerned about what their children are viewing on the internet. That's totally understandable. Predators are real. But in cases like this, the hysteria takes over and rational thought goes out of the window. Instead of viewing Mother Bird as just a viral creepy image, people were actually taking it seriously, spreading all manner of unverifiable allegations. Now, I'm not saying there's not an issue here, especially when creepy and disturbing stuff is put into YouTube kids videos, and there have been tons of examples of where that's happened. And obviously, if your child is just chilling watching Peppa Pig and then all of a sudden this comes up, then yes, I'd be concerned. But it's not some nefarious plot to make children unalive themselves. It's just people trying to be edgy online. The artist ended up throwing away Mother Bird, and I guess the curse was lifted, never to be spoke of again.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
December 21st, 2012 was the day in which many people believed that the world would end. This was mainly due to a misrepresentation of the Mesoamerican long count calendar, also known as the Mayan calendar.
The Mayans lived about 2,000 years ago, and they were very keen astronomers and mathematicians. At an archaeological site called Tortuguero, a monument was discovered that contained an inscription. This depicted the end of an era in 2012, or, as the Mayans called it, the 13th Baktun.
The long count calendar spanned around 5,125 years and ended on December 21st, 2012. But it didn't mean the end of the world. It basically represented the end of a cycle, moving to a new cycle. It basically resets itself.
So even with months that were 20 days long, they would go up to 19, and then the 20th day was usually 0, which meant the end of one cycle and the beginning of another.
But that didn't stop the doomsdayers, the New Agers, and pretty much anyone on the internet in 2012 from being absolutely terrified or spreading some sort of theory about how the world was going to end.
It's the apocalypse. End of days.
There is so much that I could say about all of the different theories, from alien invasions to Planet X colliding with the Earth, to Heidi Montag and Spencer Pratt spending $10 million because they truly believed it was all over. The Blair Witch Project came out when I was 10 years old, and I remember having it on video and being absolutely obsessed with it. But not just the film, the books too, which I was totally hooked on, and I genuinely thought that they were real. The first book I remember having was the Blair Witch Dossier, which collected all of these fake news articles about the case, and then I had all 8 of the Blair Witch Files, which were a series of young adult books that were supposedly written by Heather Donahue's cousin. I was so convinced that this was real that when my mum kindly pointed out that on the front page of the book it said something along the lines of all characters and events in this book are fictional, I literally cried. I cried. My childhood dreams of tracking down the Blair Witch had been crushed, scuppered, completely destroyed. But I wasn't the only person that believed in the Blair Witch. Back in the 90s, found footage horror films weren't super popular. So when the Blair Witch Project got released, people lost their shit. The story followed 3 documentary filmmakers, Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard. They decided to make a documentary about a local urban legend about the Blair Witch, and the entire thing is obviously fake, but the marketing around the movie played into the found footage documentary style. They used missing posters, and they had an amazing website that contained the mythology of the Blair Witch, and it was all designed to make you believe that the story was true. The IMDb page even listed the actors as missing and presumed dead. Now obviously it was just a horror film, but the marketing was pretty amazing for the time. Like, they built this entire world and they got gullible children like me to actually believe in it. I just can truly remember the disappointment I felt on finding out that the Blair Witch wasn't real like it was yesterday. It literally, I think I found the root of all of my childhood trauma. For this next one, your mind might go back to 2008 and a particularly bad Indiana Jones film starring Harrison Ford, obviously, and Shia LaBeouf. We're talking about crystal skulls, also known as Aztec skulls. Basically, they're skulls that are usually made of clear quartz, or I think it's also known as like a milky white quartz, and the people that found them tried to pass them off as some kind of amazing archaeological find, usually claiming that they were Mesoamerican Aztec artifacts. One of the most famous examples is the Mitchell Hedges skull, which, oh boy, this is a story. So there was this bloke called Frederick Mitchell Hedges, and he was your typical privileged, affluent white man in the 1900s. He classed himself as an adventurer. There's no coffee left. I'm just kind of like swinging this around willy-nilly. If you're worried, I drank it all. So he classed himself as this adventurer, basically meaning that he has enough money and privilege to just gallivant spreading bullshit everywhere. He became obsessed with Atlantis, which is the first red flag, and then he also used to allegedly tell people that he had discovered tribes and lost cities, which is big colonizer energy. So him and his daughter Anna are on an expedition in the 1920s. I don't know why they call it an expedition, because it's really just like white people being a nuisance in Belize. Anyway, they claim to have found a crystal skull at a Maya ruin, and Frederick called it the Skull of Doom. I really am just throwing this out. I'm going to put this cup down. I'm putting the mug down. Crystal skulls have been on display in several museums, including the British Museum, but they are most likely all fake. In 1992, a crystal skull was sent anonymously to the Smithsonian Institute with a note that read, "This Aztec skull was purchased in Mexico in 1960. This sent Jane McLaren Walsh on a journey to prove the authenticity of the crystal skulls."
Dr. Jane Walsh has studied crystal skulls just like her fictional colleague, Indiana Jones. She writes about them for the cover story in the new issue of Archaeology magazine.
Don't look it in the eye because they're supposed to be cursed.
She found that there were large differences in the crystal skulls and the skulls that were depicted in other Mesoamerican art. She also discovered that the crystal skull on display in the British Museum had been bought from Tiffany & Co. in 1898, and before that, Tiffany & Co. had bought it from a man named Eugene Boban, who was another fraudster basically. They did numerous tests on the skulls and they discovered that the materials used were way more modern than the Mayan or Aztec people had access to.
Dr. Walsh says crystal skulls aren't ancient carvings at all.
All of the ones that I've looked at were carved with modern tools.
Dr. Walsh says the first skull was a hoax created by a French antiquities dealer just over 100 years ago. A dozen are now housed in museums around the world.
Do you think they're all fakes then?
Yes.
She also found a photograph of the Mitchell Hedges skull in a journal called Man in 1936. But in that journal, it was labelled the Burney skull because it was owned by an art dealer called Sidney Burney. He had actually sold it to Frederick Mitchell Hedges in an auction at Sotheby's. So the story that Frederick cooked up with his daughter was a fraud, and the crystal skulls are basically just a bunch of rich people quite literally selling each other bullshit. So we've reached the end of the first level of the iceberg and we are ending on a high. Again, I would say that this is more conspiracy than hoax, but it is truly a wild story. Paul is Dead is a conspiracy theory where people believe that on the 9th of November 1966, Paul McCartney died in a car crash and was replaced by a lookalike. Now I know it sounds wacky, so let's get into the evidence. Back in 1966, Paul McCartney had a car accident. It was very minor injuries, everything's fine. However, people started to spread rumours, and back in the 60s, the Beatles had an official magazine called the Beatles Monthly Book, and in February 1967, somebody wrote that stories about the Beatles are always flying around Fleet Street. The 7th of January was very icy, with dangerous conditions on the M1 motorway, linking London with the Midlands. And towards the end of the day, a rumour swept London that Paul McCartney had been killed in a car crash on the M1. But of course, there was absolutely no truth in it at all. As the Beatles press officer found out when he telephoned Paul's St John's Wood home and was answered by Paul himself, that he had been at home all day with his black Mini Cooper safely locked up in the garage. The rebuttal doesn't stop the rumours spreading though, obviously. And on 17th of September 1969, an editor of a student newspaper in Des Moines wrote an article titled, "Is Beatle Paul McCartney Dead?" Apparently, at campuses all over, the rumours were swirling that Paul was actually dead. Now, in this time, Paul had actually retreated a little bit from public life with his then wife Linda, rest in peace, and the birth of his daughter Mary. He just wanted to get away for a little bit. He's been like super popular in the public eye and he's just taking a little bit of a break from public life, and obviously everybody thinks he's dead. Now in October 1969, the rumours took a stranger turn. A college student called Tom Zarsky called into a show hosted by a man named Russ Gibb, and he told Russ to listen to the White Album backwards.
Who do we have here? What's your name?
Tom in the line.
Yeah, hello, Tom. What's going down?
I was going to rant with you about McCartney being dead. What is this all about?
Yeah, well, what school do you go to?
I go to Eastern Michigan.
Eastern Michigan, and you heard that McCartney was dead.
Yeah, that's right.
Number 9. Number 9. Number 9. And when I played it backwards and spun it backwards, it said, "Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man." Whew.
It's again important to look at the era in which this is happening, like 1969, the end of the 60s, the Manson family, the satanic panic kind of stuff is like starting to heat up a little bit, and backmasking becomes this thing that people are concerned about, because people think that there are like hidden messages inside rock music, specifically rock music, that it's all to do with like devil worship and all that kind of stuff. And again, I have a whole video on satanic panic, and there's a big bit in there about backmasking and this idea that people were planting messages in music. Now, according to the guy that called in, at the end of the song, I'm So Tired, John Lennon could be heard saying, "Paul is dead, man. Miss him, miss him, miss him." Also, apparently he heard John Lennon saying, "Turn me on, dead man," on the song Revolution No. 9. So after this phone call, a bunch of other people start to call in, claiming that they know what's going on and they've got their own theories.
That instant, the phone lit up. I mean, it just, boom.
People who were listening all called the local other media. They called the radio stations and the television stations.
Within 7 minutes, the head of our news department was in saying, "What's going on? Our phones are all jammed. I can't get in or out." Everything was going crazy.
And it just went nuts. People just went nuts.
People started to bang on the door. And kids were coming to a window. We had a big window, and I could see through the 2 glasses that we had that there were kids coming around with instants.
Russ starts to go through other clues, and he basically rolls up his audience, and he brings all these people on, and they're ringing up and they're being like, "Oh yeah, I know what's going on with him. He's been replaced by somebody." And the audience starting to actually believe it. Now, 2 days after the radio broadcast, Fred Labor, a then student at the University of Michigan, wrote a satirical article which said McCartney dead, new evidence brought to light. And he basically made it all up. It was like an early version of an Onion article, only the mainstream news picked this article up as fact, and all of a sudden the shit was everywhere.
I was scared. When it first came out, it was like it took on this worldwide sort of importance, and I was just, this Weisenheimer kid in Michigan, who had caused this. So it was like, whoa, I was not prepared to deal with it.
The generally accepted Paul is dead theory is that on the 9th of November 1966, Paul got into a car crash after having an argument with the rest of the Beatles, and he ended up being like off with the head and replaced with the winner of a Paul McCartney lookalike contest so that their beloved fans wouldn't lose their shit over his death. The lookalike was alleged to be a man named William Campbell, or William Shears Campbell, or sometimes known as Billy Shears.
So I just imagined this whole scenario and wrote it as sort of a quasi news story with a lot of facts and enough facts that were true to sort of keep pulling you along, and enough facts that weren't true that hopefully would let you know that this was a joke. This was a satire.
There's people that say that the cover of Abbey Road is actually a funeral procession, with John Lennon being the heavenly figure. I think TikTok will have something to say about that. George Harrison being the gravedigger, and Ringo Starr representing the Undertaker. Peace and love indeed.
Peace and love, peace and love.
It's obviously all nonsense, but it's one of those conspiracies that kind of took off, and I don't really know how many people actually believe it, but some people did. Life magazine actually printed this cover to finally put the rumours to bed, but obviously some people still clung on for dear life. There's been more modern versions of this kind of theory, with people claiming that Avril Lavigne died and was replaced. And I can remember all the rumours that went around about Andrew WK as well, like back in the early 2000s. And again, the timing of the Paul is dead theory is important to remember as well, because it gained prevalence in the years after JFK's assassination. And Beatles fans were bloody mad, as we all know. But people nowadays seem just as capable of falling for mad conspiracies as they were back then. So in a way, it's nice to know that nothing has changed. And just in case you were wondering, George Harrison is the best Beatle. So we made it to the end of the first tier, and I think you can tell by the length of this video why I wanted to give each tier individual attention. I just wanted to do each subject justice, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if not, good luck, because there's lots more to come. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!